Welcome to our webinar titled Family Office Cybersecurity in the Wake of the National Public Data Social Security Number Breach, Immediate Actions and Future Readiness. Today's session is hosted by Dr. Kirby Ross-Block, CEO and founder of Tamarin Learning, and will focus on critical insights and actionable strategies to strengthen cybersecurity for family offices in light of recent events. To guide us through this important conversation, we are joined by two highly regarded experts in the field. First, we are pleased to introduce Dale Buckner, CEO and President of Global Guardian. Dale brings unparalleled experience in risk management, having led Global Guardian since 2012. His distinguished career includes multiple combat tours and deployments across various conflict zones worldwide. Dale's background in special operations, including his leadership roles in the U.S. Army Infantry and Special Forces Green Berets, has positioned him as a leading expert in global security. His experience is critical in understanding the immediate actions needed to mitigate risks in today's volatile cyber environment. Our second expert is Judy Pearson, who leads the Family Office and Trustee Liability Resource Group for Wood Ruff Sawyer. Judy has extensive expertise in identifying, mitigating, and transferring risk for wealth transfer vehicles and fiduciaries. As a leading voice in trustee liability and risk management, Judy has worked with some of the most complex trust laws and structures, providing innovative insurance solutions for trustees, fiduciaries, and family offices. Before we dive into our discussion, let's briefly review the context of the recent Social Security number breach that has sparked heightened concern for cybersecurity. In this breach, a staggering 2.7 billion personal identifiable information records were exposed, including names, emails, phone numbers, Social Security numbers, mailing addresses, and dates of birth, making it one of the largest data breaches ever recorded. The scale of this breach is alarming, with an estimated 1.3 million individuals directly impacted and 292 million U.S. Social Security numbers exposed, representing about 60% of all historical Social Security numbers issued by the IRS. The economic fallout could lead to billions of dollars in fraudulent transactions and identity theft, affecting not only U.S. citizens but also international individuals who underwent background checks. With this context in mind, we will begin by asking a critical question. What are the dangers of having large amounts of personal identifiable information out on the web?
And I can find your address, where you went to college, where your vacation home is, where you work through LinkedIn. When you start piecing all of that information together, and then you have a Social Security number. Once I have, through the open web and the dark web, if I have Social Security number plus address plus email plus phone number, and then whatever else might be being sold on the dark web, now you have enough information that I can open a small loan in your name, I can open credit cards in your name, and I can apply for services in your name. And the last piece of this is just the value of a medical record combined with a Social Security number. There's enough information in your medical records, which is one of the fastest things that are sold on the dark web every day at scale. Now you have enough information to really get into your life, let alone what else might be being sold on the dark web.
Okay, so actually we're thinking about Social Security numbers as a gateway to identity and really to a gateway to credit facilities and getting access to loans, mortgages, stuff, being able to get access to capital, really, illegally.
100%. And to give you a sense of the market, a Social Security number is typically sold for anywhere between $6.50 to $9 on the dark web. A medical record, a U.S. medical record, is sold for about $75 a record. Can you imagine if you sell 1.3 million of these, what that starts to look like? So this is a $9 trillion industry a year. If this was a GDP, it would be the third largest GDP in the world of stolen data, behind the United States and China. That's how massive this is. And no one platform, which I'm sure we'll get into later, of cybersecurity, no one has developed a platform that is all-encompassing, that protects the individual, your phone, your laptop, your desktop, your business. That doesn't exist yet. If it did, we wouldn't have these problems. The simple reality is this is a problem that's not going away. It's only going to get worse with AI, and we're just at the beginning of this.
Oh my Lord. So I just want to take a pause. We had a couple people raise their hand who had experiences, and I know they were raising their hand to say it happened to them. And I don't know if they want to share their experiences or they just wanted to say they had experienced the breach. Tell me, those people who raise their hand, if they want to talk, I can allow you to talk, or if you just want to mention, because Sandy and Christine, you both raised your hand. So Christine, I'm going to put you on talk right now if you want to say anything. If not, you can just say hello, and then let's see if it works here.
So I found out in April that I was a victim of, it's called ghost ACH funding. So they set up 2 bank accounts, an IRS inquiry account, and a payroll account in my business's name. Since they had my social security number, they were able to pull everything else off the open web. And it took me over, I would say, 95 hours to get everything closed over the span of 8 months, or not 8 months, 8 weeks.
I'm so sorry.
So, and the challenge is, while there are protections at the state and federal level when it comes to your social security number, those same protections do not exist for entity numbers. So if a business identity is stolen, there are not the same protections from a statute standpoint that there are for individuals.
Thank you so much, Christine. That's so helpful. And I'm so sorry this happened to you. But boy, what really helpful information to just know, really different between Social Security and EIN, your business. And I'm so sorry again that happened to you. Let's come back to more about this discussion. Judy, can you talk to us a little bit about the insurance considerations and what you see as some of the ramifications to, say, a trustee or a fiduciary as a function of this breach?
So the first thing I would say is, like everything else, it's changing so fast and so furiously, we're all trying to keep up with it. So every time we have a new kind of claim, we have to go back and figure out what needs to be done, where does it get covered, how does it get covered, and that kind of thing. And I know there's a lot of impressions on, how much does the insurance really provide? And part of it is just the complications of the claims themselves. So let's start with, how do I view the insurance? The insurance is very important from a risk transfer perspective, of course. When you have a claim, it's a lot of dollars, especially if it's a, trustee, or, somebody doesn't have a lot of funds sitting liquid, right? So that's a challenge. But more importantly, it's some of the services. So when the claim comes in, and this isn't so much just the Social Security breach, it's all of it. When there's an actual claim, and what we're seeing from a family office and a trustee perspective, they tend to come down to a social engineering opposed to a ransomware and some of these other things. So if you have all this information that Dale was talking about, and you can figure out a way to compromise the emails, then the claims start happening. So from a service perspective, when a claim comes in, the first thing that happens is it gets reported to the FBI and the local, enforcement agencies, and then to the underwriter. The underwriter then will start looking at it and say, well, what was the breach? Does the breach go to a level of fines and penalties, right? So you have to figure out, was there a breach? What kind of it? How many records? To see if there's any regulatory issues and notification issues. The second thing that they start doing is looking at your systems to see what might have been compromised from an email perspective. What are the rules out there that we might have hidden from ourselves, that we don't see what's going on, so that we can prevent further challenges. So one of the big myths that I get from clients is they say, everything's in the cloud. So if I have a problem, all I have to do is dial back a day, rebuild everything, and we're ready to go. Well, the claims that we're seeing, the breaches, the business email compromise, which is really where it starts coming in, some of them have been going on for 6 months. So you have to figure out when the breach actually occurred and what emails have gone out to figure out how to make sure that there are no issues. So it's the service part about finding out what actually happened and how to tighten everything down again. The other thing that some of the underwriters do is they will they're not as sophisticated as we'd like them to be, but they're getting there, right? But we often get emails from the underwriters to our clients saying, hey, we saw a breach, or we saw a detection of an open, you haven't implemented a fix of some sort, that you really need to get in and close it down. So that's a preventative measure to make sure that we're not going to have some of these claims. So it's so complex, and everybody's just trying to keep ahead of it if they can. But from our perspective, sometimes you don't know until the claim comes in. We can talk a little bit later about all the different insurance that we need to think about, but that's the general view that I have. It's service first, and then the actual claim second. The underwriters also have a panel counsel often. And in the old world, panel counsels used to be a bad word, because clients think that means underwriters are just going to inexpensive law firms to save money. The underwriters have really learned that you have to get the best of the best, because you save hours and you save time.
Got it. Oh, now we just
elevate. Oh, can you not hear me?
We just lost you for a second. You just cut out for a second. So pick up again.
Yeah, to elevate the pressure that the banks were, to put pressure on the banks to get them to really look to see if we can get some refunds. So those are the kinds of things that we're seeing the insurance companies do.
Understood. Dale, I want to flip it back to you and think more from the family office perspective. What have you seen family offices been doing? And I'm wondering, I know Global Guardian does so many different kinds of assessments, and you're always more proactive than reactive, right? That's the way you like to operate with your clients. And I know one of the things we have as a lead behind coming out of this webinar today is an amazing assessment that your team put together. I'm wondering, Tori, I'm going to just pop this open and see if I can share that really quickly, because there is a really cool, excuse me while I get to it really quickly. So this is just the first page of it, but we have a really amazing assessment that they're going to share later. But I just wondered, Dale, if you can jump in and talk to me more about some of the things that family offices are doing to be proactive on this front with respect to this breach.
Yeah. And I'll dovetail off of Judy. Is by the time it gets to Judy, now you're in cleanup mode, and it is difficult. As you said, Kirby, we want to be on the front end of this to try and stop this in the first place. So a couple of key principles for the audience and family offices right up front that we see often. One, almost 80% of most family offices do not have a dedicated cyber expert in their headquarters. 70% don't even have it outsourced. They might have an outsourced platform. What we do see is they hire an IT person. And the first thing I want to say is family offices need to understand that IT is not cyber. Simply view IT as the platform. IT connects phones and TVs and Wi-Fi and makes systems talk. and there's connectivity and so on and so forth. Having an IT expert, quote unquote, and then bringing in, and as Judy said, putting things in the cloud or having some kind of cyber platform is never going to protect your office. No one has figured out how to execute full cybersecurity off of one platform. So the first lesson is that IT is not cyber. The second lesson is you have to have multiple layers in order to protect the office and the family members. You've got to have an encryption platform for everything from the cell phone to the laptop to the desktop. The routers and Wi-Fi have to be inspected for encryption and password coverage. You've got to execute at least a basic level of training of what phishing looks like, how credit freezes work, what the settings on your cell phone should be at the individual level. You've got to have policy. If you're running a business, as that previous participant had stated, once you have a breach, and if you do not have your general counsel putting together a real policy, you can get sued and be liable. And then think of, just as I earlier stated, when you think about social media, you think about your exposure, can you, if one of your family members or family office members was hacked, can you wipe their phone in about 1:15 seconds so you can't go any deeper? That's just an app. It doesn't cost much, and it's completely viable to wipe computers, wipe cell phones from anyone in the world very quickly and efficiently. When you think about annually executing a dark web search or biannually, looking to see what can the world find out about the individual family member, family office itself, execute an open web search, a dark web search, and then folks like us can start getting rid of the exposure in your life and for the business, if you will. And then the last comment is everyone in the family office space should be moving towards real-time monitoring. There should be elements that are monitoring every website you hit, every hot link you hit, the email inbound, so that if there is anything that registers that could be corrupt or malware or ransomware, that phone, that system is now isolated. The analysis is done in real time. And then if there's nothing there, you go about your business. If there is, then you can take real-time actions to minimize any damage might be there. Ultimately, the way to view this, if you're a family member, is this, or a family office member, and you're running an office. The physical world has to be now connected to the digital world, and you have to protect in a 360-degree manner, and you have to do real-time monitoring. You've got to do training, and you've got to have systems, multiple systems. It's not one system. You have to have the system for the phones. You have to have a system for the Wi-Fi. You have to have a system for your laptop. You've got to have a system for your banking. It has to be multi-layered, or it's just a matter of time.
So Dale, I do know that there's some family offices that seem to focus just on the family. So is it just good enough to do this for the family that the family office serves, or does the family office have to do this for the family office employees too?
Yeah. So simply put, when we've gone in and had to do major remediation for clients that have been materially hacked, what we find is they don't go after the matriarch or the patriarch. They go after the younger children, or they go after the family office infrastructure and the family office employees. Because if you think about it, they're the soft underbelly. To your point, Kirby, most family offices are so focused on the family members and everything they do to provide for them that they forget that the family office itself, both the physical infrastructure, the routers, the Wi-Fi, the systems, and all of those family offices members that walk around with cell phones and laptops, and if they work from home, has anyone inspected the router, and how do you reconnect into the system to the family office? All of those things seem to get kind of layered under. And what we find is when we do all of the investigatory work, we typically find that they didn't go directly after the matriarch or the patriarch or a family member. They go after kids and then the people that support the family members that are around them, because they are the easy button in the soft underbelly into the infrastructure.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to add to that, because it's the vendors as well. About half of our breaches come in from the vendors. And so we actually had one claim recently where the bad actor of the vendor ended up talking to the bad actor of our trustee. And like trying to recoup everything that happened was insanity. So, Dale, even I'd be interested on how you even managed through the vendor situation.
Yep. It's a great point, Judy. So we will go, and this goes back to my policy comment. If the general counsel, whether insourced or outsourced, does not have a policy for vendors, think about all the different feeds and different services you have, everything from black car service to NetJet to aviation to so on and so forth. When you think about that, this goes back to policy. So if you have the policy that when you bring on a vendor, that vendor has to meet your standard of cyber protection so that what you just described can't happen. That is the way to protect yourselves as a family office from the vendor network.
And I'll make a little plug for their assessment because, Judy, it's in Global Guardian's risk assessment for the family office that they even go to that depth of asking about vendors, cybersecurity and risk protection. So it's right. It's like a whole 360, and you have to keep peeling away the onion, and that means who's in your ecosystem. And it's not just your people, it's all the service providers that plug into your family and your family office. So these are really critical pieces of your infrastructure. Judy, let's switch gears because I know that you have some interesting stories about different claims, and I want to jump to the one just that's sort of really juicy around Graceland. Can you tell some of the folks about what's going on with that one?
Yeah, so the newest breach that we've seen is titling of property. And so we've had actually a number of claims, but the one that's been in the public and I can talk about is Graceland, the Elvis Presley house. So somehow the bad actors got enough information to change the title of Graceland, the big, his original house, and was trying to sell it. And by the time the beneficiaries of Graceland understood what was going on, I think it took something like 6 months for them to figure out how to change the title back into their name. But they almost lost the iconic house because of the bad actors having enough information. And we have actually seen that on a much smaller level a number of times with our family offices and our families and our trust scenarios. So, what they're starting to steal is even more thought-provoking. And then when we try and figure out, well, what's covered by a policy and what's not covered by a policy, there's certain things that are like, oh gosh, I didn't think about that. Let's go back through all of the different policies to see where we can get some coverage, because it's not always so clear because the way these things are written and the way they had an original intent versus how everything is playing out.
So fascinating. It's just, it's getting more and more convoluted and crazy. It's incredible to think about the ingenuity, but it's also frightening to think about how sinister some of these fraudsters and schemers are. Dale,
just before I go there,
yeah,
think about one of the things that happened during COVID is all of a sudden things like DocuSign became acceptable even in a court of law, right? But now all these things can get breached or spoofed. Like I had one in my social security number that, one of my vendors sent an email saying that my social security number had been breached and they were going to give me a free service to watch over for a year. And when I clicked on it, which you think I'm better trained than that, it turned out that that was fraudulent. It was completely spoofed. So the spoofing is a big deal. Like, I don't know how many of you have even tried to call something like your internet provider. I use Xfinity. You type in Xfinity customer service, and the first one you're like, well, that's not right. Second one, well, that's not right. You get about 6 or 7 down, you're like, well, I think that one's right. And then they spoof the multi-factor authentication. So even with all of this information, they just have so much creativity and thought process. I just don't click on anything.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of paralyzes folks, I think, and then you become so jaded. Dale, I'm just wondering, what do you sort of see folks doing to be creative? I mean, we're obviously past two-factor, now we're into multi-factor. When does it end? Like, where do you go from multi-factor? Because I feel like we're gonna have like tertiary, like 27-step factor authentication. So what happens next?
Yeah. So if you think about AI, and it's a deep conversation way beyond, I'll oversimplify this, but with voice and video replication, we have already started as a stopgap, and that's all it is right now. And you brought up multi-authentication. We've all become conditioned to receiving a text to confirm a transaction, whatever that might be. And for family offices, very specifically, you have just typically a small group of people that are authorized to execute very large transactions on behalf of the family office and family. We've all become very comfortable with that authentication through the bank. So you log in, you have to get a text number typically, or an email number. And what we've seen and we've been implementing with our family offices in the interim to make sure that if we're going to execute something and someone has found their way into a video system or a chat group or a phone con group, that in order for, say, the top three at a family office to approve the execution of a very large transaction, that now only those top three in this example would have a code word. So this will sound a little James Bondish, but it's very simple and very effective, as we are waiting on the technology to catch up on how to execute using multi-authentication, knowing that voice and video can now be injected and people can compromise that process. So ultimately, the takeaway has been this: we have added a password, a code word that only the top three people at the family office know. And when they are going to execute something large, that password, if you will, that code word is shared between those three to confirm that who's on the video is actually real, who is on the phone call is actually real, or there is a phone call direct one-on-one between those personnel, and they share that code word in addition to the multi-factor authentication. It's been effective, and it guarantees that someone that is replicating your voice or your video presence, that you don't get stung by that level of AI that clearly is coming online now at scale. So it's an example of a creative way to ensure that those top three people are the top three people when they're communicating, beyond the obvious multi-authentication systems that we have today.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's really helpful information. And I think that is something definitely MI6 kind of level, but I think it's worthy, especially if you have those kind of great stakes sort of situations. And, you really do have to take those precautionary measures for high stakes kinds of trades and wires and moving capital for sure.
Again, $9 trillion a year is being lost with cyber fraud. 9 trillion globally. Like, you can't go too far right now in the space we're in. If you frame it that way, you just can't. It's happening at such a scale. There is no other option here.
Yeah. I mean, it's horrifying, like, to think how much leakage we have. I mean, that's on the lower end, we're thinking about like 80 trillion being passed from one generation to the next. So that's like 10% of the world's global wealth transfer is just going out the door to fraudsters and shysters, basically. Excuse me. Hope I don't offend anyone, but yeah, let's just think about, and I know, Dale, you've got some crazy statistic on what is expected, right? The amount of breach and
Yeah. So just 7 years ago, it was 1 trillion 7 years ago. So in 7 years, we went from 1 trillion globally in losses, cyber losses, to 9, and we're going to go to 15 trillion in the next 4 years. It is exponentially increasing every single day globally.
yeah. So I would imagine we used to only think that the banks and RIAs and financial services were the hot ticket and targets and the governments, right? And sovereign nations. But I'm sorry, I think family offices are pretty much at the tip of the iceberg and really front and center in terms of targets. So I think we have to batten down the hatches and look to protect them. And as Judy knows, the fiduciaries are right in the bullseye too.
Just remember too, 2 points on that. So if you look at the FBI statistics, the highest growth mode are small businesses, where we would put the family offices in. And I say small business not because of the assets under administration, but the number of employees and the systems and what gets affected opposed to a large manufacturing entity. And I think that's how they really look at the definition of a small business. So that's the biggest growth from the criminals. And then think about the fact that, who are the cyber criminals? I mean, they have such a network, right? That's being generated. I mean, they've got, people held captive just figuring out how to get this information and how to use it. What was it, Dale? You might be able to, figure out these statistics, but like 15 years ago, it was the little kids sitting, in their home. And now it's these cyber criminals that have bases with hundreds of thousands of people sitting there, and they're captive, they're slaves, right? So when you think about what the criminals are today, it's not what you think.
Yeah. And these
Yeah,
networks, yeah, go ahead, Dale.
Simply put, these are small cyber armies, to your point, Judy. So when you think about the Chinese, when you think about North Korea, when you think about Iran, when you think about the Russians, and we, frankly, in the last 38 cyber hacks that we've gone through, a majority have been Russians. To your point, these are small cyber armies with thousands of people and millions upon millions of automated bots that are coming after systems, looking for an entryway into anything that has created wealth. So it is an overwhelming global cyber army now. And to your point, you can literally outsource cyber hacking at this point. You can go into the dark web and it's basically cyber hackers for rent. And the explosion of the botnet that will come in, and automated persistent threat to try and get in your systems, is now everywhere. So the scale of it is truly stunning and growing every day.
So I want to just jump to, let's assume you were compromised and someone had asked, please define compromise. And I'm going to say your social security number, your personal information showed up in that breach, and it's out there, it's accessible on the dark web. What are the immediate actions that you should do, Dale, and to protect yourself? What would be the recommendations that you would give?
So the standard playbook is freeze your credit. That's a no-brainer. It's been out there for decades now. To have your bank, your CFO, the family office put systems in place to now monitor all of your financial activity and have it reviewed on a near daily frequency within the family office, but also have an automated system looking for red flags that's going to alert you of any kind of large transactions or requests that are out of the norm. You should request a fraud alert file be opened through your bankers for sure. Review your account and your credit file immediately. And then where you get beyond kind of the conventional methodology is now, and then contact your cyber provider and put them on high alert. Number one, have a conversation about what systems you don't have as a family office or a family. Talk about how much deeper you need to go into this and protecting the family. And then lastly, change every password you have, every banking password, every Hotmail, Gmail, Yahoo, every password you have to get on your computer, your laptop, your desktop. change all the settings on your phone. And I mean all of them. Make sure that your phone is not, you don't have your tracking on, you do not have your Bluetooth on, you do not have your Wi-Fi on. You don't walk around literally as an open sensor waiting for the world to tap into your phone, your laptop, your desktop, or your home. And then have your, whether it's the office or the home, have the entire office setting with the router and the passwords, and ensure that it's encrypted, so that all those systems, that is where the physical and the digital come together. That's really where you get one level beyond just freezing your credit and telling everyone to start monitoring your activity. Then you really want to get into that PhD level of protecting the family office and its family members.
That's great advice. And Judy, what recommendations on the like sort of fiduciary side, what would you give folks a heads up on that they can do to protect themselves if you're a trustee or in some sort of capacity as a fiduciary? What would you say to them to be wise and aware of with this breach?
So the things that I talk with my clients about is some of the myths out there. Myth number one is, oh, I read about this all the time, I think I understand it. No, you need training. You need, simulated attacks, and you need it every day, every month, every year, right? And keep getting trained. And I find that honestly, it's been a little challenging to get some of these people to understand how important this training is. And actually, it's really difficult for smaller organizations to get the training because of the licensing fees and minimum licenses. And we're actually working with some people to try and solve that, to be able to get licenses for one person, two people, five people, what have you. So training. The other piece of it is the myths that there are is, well, we don't have custody, so how are we going to have a claim? And quite frankly, a year ago, we would be talking with our clients and saying, well, we think this could happen and we think that could happen. And everybody always had an argument. Well, December 15th, we had 7 claims. They're all essentially the same, which was a business email compromise, that bad actors had been watching the distributions, the human error in terms of the callbacks and mistakes being made and what have you. And now I'd say we're getting a couple of claims a month on that. So what I'd say to everybody, custody is not the issue. Care and control, which goes back to what Dale was saying, is tightening down the bank accounts. I love this code word idea. I hadn't heard about that. The callback even on every single transfer. Looking at the systems periodically to see if there are rules out there that you might not have noticed that things are going on. So I would kind of say all the things that Dale was saying are the things that we're talking to our fiduciaries about.
These are all, go ahead.
Yeah, and then the other thing I just want to kind of have a quick, people do talk about the insurance piece of it. What we have experienced in going through these claims is, number one, social engineering is the number one exposure we see, but one underwriter won't provide the adequate limit. So we have to build very large towers of called cyber liability to get a reasonable limit of social engineering. And then we're also fidelity bonds. So a lot of people go, well, there's only 2 of us or 5 of us or 10 of us. Do we really need a fidelity bond? And I'd say, most of them have pretty tight look at employee theft, but it helps us build additional cyber liability limits. And it also has additional coverages around wire transfer fraud. And then the other piece is errors and omissions. One of our largest claims recently was one where we had kept saying to this organization, buy cyber liability. And they're like, next year. And the good news is there's no exclusion on the errors and omissions policy. So we got it all covered under the E&O policy. So I guess what I'm trying to say is keep our eyes and ears open, listen to creativity, talk about all the different things that your business or individuals are doing so that we can puzzle piece everything together. Because it's not, as Dale knows, we may have it solved for today, and then tomorrow something happens that we didn't think about. Right? So, and the other thing I always say to everybody is we don't all have the answers, but if enough people ask the questions on the team, we can usually solve it. But we're all like, I, learn things every day. And like I said, like Dale talked about some things that I hadn't thought about. And if we're all together, we at least can be better at prevention, assessment and coverage.
Got it. This is so helpful. I know we have about 10 minutes left, and I would love to open up for some questions. So there's some questions and comments I know in the chat. And, actually, I see a couple. First off, Jonathan asked, will any materials be distributed after this call? And I want to answer that one. Yes, we will be disseminating the recording. And then there will be a link to that risk assessment that Global Guardian created. And so that will be shared, as well as I think Judy has some other resources that she wanted to provide as well. So we want to endow you all with as much knowledge and information to protect and prepare you and your family offices and your people. So that will definitely be going out. I've been notified of past breaches, personal information. I accepted free credit monitoring, and I also froze my credit with 3 agencies. My question is, should I accept another free year of that service? That's a good question. Who wants to take that one? So keeping ongoing monitoring of, credit monitoring.
So I'll take the basic one, and then Dale can do the more complex. The basic one is double check that free service actually has the $1 million of identity theft. I know Experian now has, actual insurance from the individual perspective. And so, I've actually paid for it. So I know that I'm getting the monitoring, especially after I got spoofed on the free service. So now I know my monthly payment is in there. I'd like to think that I'm getting the coverage. So the more basic question is absolutely take the free, make sure that you've got the additional coverage and monitoring in this service. And then Dale, I'm sure you've got a much more sophisticated answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, the easy answer is yes, of course, you take that for sure. If you feel that you've had a breach in any way, shape, or form, as discussed earlier, it is worth the time and effort and money to do a full open web search, a full dark web search, and then for a year, just a year, have both the open web and the dark web monitored for your information, your address, your phone number, your passwords, your social security number, your bank accounts. All of that can be set up in an automated fashion that, again, you want to go from good to great. That's the way you do that, if you will.
And then there's
I've got a question, and I'm sorry to, but it's all out there on me. I know that. I mean, I get that we change our passwords, what have you, but the genie's out of the bottle. I can't get my social security number back. Like, what do we do when it's out there?
So you can change your social security number. And it takes about 3 to 4 months. If you have a material breach where your social security number really is creating heartburn and you've had accounts open your name, you've been breached in that way, you can absolutely have your social security number changed. And then as described, you can have all of your accounts monitored in real time. And that, when you go to that level, it is the absolute best solution that exists both in the open web and the dark web. So that you can, if you change your passwords, you change your systems, you change your social security number, if you've really been materially breached, that is as good as it's going to get. And then have all your systems monitored in real time. That is the defense. Because to your point, Judy, that all of our digital footprints have been exposed. My personal, when I was in special forces, my personal military file was taken by the Chinese. And that was 20 years ago. So this is real, it's happening, but you can take those kinds of steps. And I've had clients, material clients that have been breached where their social security number had been sold over 300,000 times, that had over 17 accounts in their name. We simply changed their social security number and then put them on all those platforms as described.
Fascinating. I didn't know you could change your social security number.
Yep, absolutely.
There's another question about, does companies like Black Cloak cover most worries we may have for protection?
So you simply put, you really want to get into the details. Whenever you think about a commercialized, commoditized platform that costs $10, $15 a month, a lot of those systems, when you look deeper into it, are not nearly as sophisticated. It's very cursory on what's being monitored and what's being done in real time. So you want to look at the terms, you want to ask hard questions and the so what questions of, is this being, if I hit a hot link and it's a honeypot to China, as they call it, meaning you hit a hot link, you think you're going, as Judy described, to a real business, and it's just a honeypot to get you to the Russians, the Chinese, whatever organization it might be. Is that being monitored in real time? And then what are the steps right after that happens? You need to ask that kind of so what question. And then you need to think about, okay, if any one of you in the audience right now, your family or family member, or you as a family office member, employee, were hacked right now, do you know who you're going to call? If it's a ransom and they're asking for $2 million, do you know who's going to negotiate that? Who's going to advise you on whether you should pay the ransom or not? Do you know if you have your information backed up? As Judy alluded to earlier, that's very important to know and where that stands. And ultimately, do you know how you would pay that ransom? Do you know how money turns into Bitcoin to be then paid through the dark web? And if you don't, that's okay, but you need to know who you're going to call and reach out to execute that remediation to get you through it. So it is the aha moment. And if you think about that, and that happened tonight, would you know what to do? Would you know who to call? And then lastly, if you have insurance and you have a person like Judy advising, what is that going to provide you, and what are the terms and conditions, and what box will be covered and what won't be covered within that policy? All those things are incredibly important when you think about what could happen tonight.
And just on a really basic thing, as Dale was saying, all those things about who to call. Yeah, I didn't think about it until a couple of years ago. You need a piece of paper at home, not on your computer, not on your notes, because you might not be able to access those telephone numbers and your incident response plan. So think about having an actual piece of paper on who to call, what are the phone numbers, what are the websites, on each aspect of it.
It's really great feedback. I think there's one more question we can answer before we need to wrap. Again, this one came in. I can recommend opening all the physical mail that comes in, or can I recommend opening all the physical mail that comes in, question mark. If anything looks out of sorts, investigate it. Also place a fraud alert freeze with check systems as well.
So when you think about hard mail, unless you feel that you've been targeted, and you see this, government officials being targeted where there can be a chemical or something that can hurt you physically, that's very rare. And unless you've had some indication of a physical mail threat with a chemical, or you've been targeted for whatever reason, outside of that, there's very low risk of opening physical mail at this point. Again, unless there is a reason you could potentially being targeted by that. There are systems and agencies and firms that do screen every piece of mail. We have clients that screen every piece of mail that comes into their business, of course. That is something you can set up, but you really need to think, is there a reason that you would be targeted in that manner with hard copy mail?
Kirby, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to clarify. I was saying to make sure the family office and all the principals of the family office, including the family members, are physically opening mail that comes to them, because that is how I learned that my identity had been stolen, was actually getting something from Bank of America saying, thank you for opening up the bank accounts. And the other thing was to add that there should be a fraud or freeze placed with check systems. They're actually the credit, kind of like the agency of the banks. So if you put a freeze there, as long as they're a member bank, then they won't open accounts under that name.
Got it. And Jonathan, you had your hand raised, so let's see if you can share what your thought is really quickly before we wrap it here.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Question is for Judy. Judy, if you have a cyber insurance policy, are you at risk of a policy breach if you engage with existing providers before engaging with the providers that the insurance company prefers or the preferred vendors that you would engage with through the policy itself? Thanks.
So if I understand the question, so you identify a security breach or, some kind of claim, you call your providers before you call the insurance providers? Is that the question?
That's correct.
So the biggest issue is getting the approval from the underwriters to pay the expense. So if you're looking to have that expense reimbursed, you need to get the approval of the underwriters. And generally, they're pretty flexible. If you've got somebody who's really good at what they do, they want the best. They don't necessarily want their own, but you have to get everybody on board before you get prior approval to get the expense reimbursed.
Got it. Thank you.
Additional, sir, you have power here. You might not realize it, but you can go to your insurance platform and state, you can ask, who is the master service provider for this portion of my cyber insurance? If you have a preferred vendor that you really think is very good at their job, you should connect that vendor to the insurance platform and policy, and you should request that they have a conversation about their capability, so on and so forth. But you can request who the master service provider, the response provider, is going to be on your policy. You do have that ability to make that linkage, if you will. And I have almost never seen an insurance platform not recognize it, acknowledge it, and then in writing put that as the service provider underneath your policy. It happens in a pretty consistent, both at the corporate level, the small business level, and the family office level. It happens weekly.
Thanks for the recommendation.
Yeah.
Well, I know we've gone over a little bit in time. I'm so thankful for everyone's attention, staying with us. You'll get the recording, you'll get a link to the survey, and you'll be able to follow up with Judy, with Dale, with us at Tamron Learning if you have any additional questions or needs. Thank you again for attending the Family Office Cybersecurity in the wake of the Social Security number breach. I'm your host, Kirby, and we're signing off.
As a reminder, don't miss out on the Global Guardian Family Office Threat Assessment that will be available following the webinar.